So it's great. So I actually wanted to start with this reflection that Bob made me think of with his first story about the revolution, which is just actually my favorite reflection of contextualization, you might say, or a little bit of interconnection. So as you sit here, just for a few moments, see who comes to mind as having played any role at all in your being here in this room right now. And just see, yeah, just see who pops up. Maybe somebody gave you a book, or read you a poem, or told you about their practice, or about this place, or maybe long ago somebody inspired you to think differently, or just see who comes up. Because none of us really were driving down that road, whatever it is, and saw the sign for Panther Kill Road. Thought, I think I'll turn up there and see what's there, right? We're all here because of conversations and interactions and relationships and encounters. This moment in time, like every moment in time, is like a confluence of all these things coming together. So who comes to mind? Sometimes I do this reflection and I think about the Board of Regents of the state of New York, which gave me a scholarship, which was how I was able to go to college. And that's, of course, how I got to India, was through this university program. Because they're part of why I'm here right now as well. And sometimes I
do a course with Dr. Kenneth Inada.
I think so.
He taught Nagarjuna at the University of Buffalo.
I didn't take a course in Nagarjuna. I took a.
No, he would do a survey course.
Yeah.
That was his research specialty.
I took a, intro to Buddhism.
Yeah, that was Kenneth Inada, Japanese American.
So let's put him in the mix prominently. Where I first heard about things like the Four Noble Truths.
I have a friend who took a survey course in Buddhism like that at Holyoke.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, and they were talking about emptiness or something, and then she suddenly had the experience that she was, in addition to being in her body, she was also the chair she was sitting in. So she, just from hearing about it, so she decided there was something there that she should like to investigate.
There you go. And so in addition to these kind of very inspiring figures, sometimes I do this reflection and I think about the people whose actions have really hurt me, not just the ones I find kind of irritating, but think about those times where I felt like I've been on an edge, like I've got to do something or I won't be free of this, right? Because they're in some funny way a part of my being here right now as well. So who comes to mind? Okay, thank you. I love doing that reflection. I do it nearly all the time. And, it's just such an interesting remembering, right? That however alone we might feel or cut off we might feel, that really our lives are part of this kind of larger picture of life and this larger flow. So now I'm going to think about your friend, you know,
Which one?
the Mexican guy, you know, and like, because who knows, you know, there's that thread that somehow, it's only been twice, this is like truth in advertising, where once I was teaching this place, it doesn't exist anymore, it's called Charlotte's Place. It was part of Trinity Church way downtown in Manhattan. And it was like a drop-in center, and it was this great room with large plate glass windows onto the street. And I was teaching there, and I did the reflection, and I said, as I said here, kind of basically, because I'm sure no one was just like walking by and thought, I'm going to go in there. And at the end, this woman came up to me to lecture. I was just walking by, and I looked inside, and I thought, I'm going to go in there. So I thought, okay, that's one little ding in my theory of reality. But, then I was teaching somewhere. I was doing a benefit for preschool, which in some other town, and the preschool was in the basement of a church, and so we were using the church for the evening, and I guess it hosted a lot of other school functions, because I did the reflection and said that line, the equivalent of that line, and this woman came up to me at the end, she said, well, I'm only here because I thought tonight was the PTA meeting, and I got the wrong night. But those are other causes and conditions, you know. She stayed, right? But really, you think about it, you know, this sense of being so disconnected, and compare it to the reality, which is that our lives are all about connection of one kind or another. And consider what the amplifications or the manifestations are. That actually also use a quotation or an image that Bob has used. I learned it from Bob. I'm sure I use it many more times than he has, but where he said, imagine you're on a subway and these Martians come and they zap the subway car so that those of you who are in the car can be together forever. So what do? If somebody's like freaking out, you try to calm them down. If somebody's hungry, you feed them. It's not because you like them necessarily at all, or you approve of them, or you want to see them like Lord of the subway car or anything. But you're going to be together forever. Your lives are tied together, right? It's not me versus them, realistically. It's us. That's how things are. So guess what? You know, there's a lot of truth to that. Our lives are tied together. It's not a question of liking or approving, or, you know, it's understanding this is like the reality. It's like the constructs we hold, which can be useful in an ordinary exchange, but if we hold to them rigidly as absolutes, they completely lead us astray, like self and other, us and them. You know, when that becomes this kind of concretized reality, we're sunk, because it's not true. It's not going to be that, you know, we get to pick and choose. And it's interesting, I think, our time in the light of the information is actually there, you know, through economics and science and environmental consciousness and even epidemiology. We don't live in a world where what happens over there is nicely going to stay over there, and it's not going to affect us over here. And that what we do here is going to be contained somehow, and it's not going to ripple out to affect those around us. us. It's just not the way things are. And so, what is that responsiveness of the heart that recognizes that? So one way of naming it is compassion. It's kind of like, woo, we're all in this together. You know, sink or swim. And so your situation is not irrelevant to me. You know, I'm not somehow immune from this. And nor is mine rightly held in isolation. So this was actually when I took that Asian philosophy course way back when. I hate to do the math. Long time ago. More than 45 years ago. As far as I can recall, honestly, it was sort of like happenstance. You know, there was a philosophy requirement, like there was a language requirement. You know, I had to do some philosophy course. I looked at the schedule. I thought, that's convenient. It's like on Tuesday. You know, let me choose that one. And it completely changed my life. Because it opened up the door to some possibility of really living differently in a way that I didn't have the tools, they didn't offer the tools, but I heard that there were tools to make that real, to relate to pleasure differently, pain differently, and even neutral experience differently. That we can have and often do have so many weird relationships to pleasure. We started talking about this before. The very classic one being holding on, craving, reifying a situation, trying to be in control. I will keep this from changing. I will somehow defy the truth of change. But there are others as well. You know, when we deflect the pleasure, we're so distracted from the pleasure. We don't allow ourselves, for whatever reason, to experience the pleasure. And there are so many conditioned and very distorted relationships to pain. Shouldn't be here, it means I've lost control, this is embarrassing. I should never, ever, 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 ever reveal that it hurts. If someone else is suffering that's displeasing, then somehow a blight upon the landscape, you know, let's just tuck them away somewhere. Or call it something else, not recognize it as a state of suffering. And so there are many distorted relationships to our own and to the pain of others. And then there are even kind of weird, distorted relationships to neutral experiences, sort of ordinary, repetitious, routine things that are part of every day, where we usually go numb, we disconnect, we go to sleep, we wait. We wait for something more intense to happen, either pleasurable or painful, so we can come alive, so we can feel alive. I think it's in this light that perhaps that, this is a quotation from the Buddha, that one who is heedful, or one who is mindful, is on the path to the deathless. One who is heedless, or one who is mindless, is as if dead already. You know, we are so numb and disconnected so much of the time. So this was the training prospect. You know, that there were things we could actually cultivate that would change our relationship to pleasure, pain, and neutrality, and therefore our whole lives. So if I went to India, based on that. So, and particularly around the relationship we have to pain, whether our own or someone else's, this issue of compassion becomes so prominent. And what's it like, you know, if you're on that subway car and the Martians come and they zap the subway car? and there's someone there, you know, you've kind of been waiting for them to get off. You know, but they don't look like they're having a really good time. And you suddenly realize we're in here together. And that's going to last forever. What is that possibility of relationship that isn't like, you know, phony? It isn't like saying, I so appreciate what you're doing. Or maybe that's very far from the truth. Or please continue on. But is genuinely formed in that recognition that we're kind of in this together, and is responsive in a way that acknowledges the suffering. That seems to be the genesis of this action, or you know, spate of actions, whatever it is. And is also not weak or giving in. So Bob and I taught a number of workshops usually called Fierce Compassion, which became the basis for the book we wrote together, which was Love Your Enemies, which I personally think is a book about to come back. Even though it was some years ago. What in the world does that mean? So compassion. Again, you know, going back to the Burmese tradition, one way it's defined is the trembling or the quivering of the heart in response to seeing pain or suffering. It's a movement of the heart, and it's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. Right? So there's this sense of not just like laying back and feeling bad. You know, it's this movement toward to see if we can be of help. And it's also not, it's distinguished from a movement into, to burn up with someone else's pain, right? However uncomfortable or poignant we might feel, we still have some basis for not being completely defined by someone else's suffering. Otherwise, we're not really that much help, even potentially. So qualities, I'll also go back and just say again, qualities like loving kindness or compassion are considered qualities of generosity, like generosity of the spirit. And like any gift, you can't determine how someone will receive it. You can't insist, well, respond this way. You know, put on that sweater right away. Tell me that book is the best book you've ever gotten. Tell me it's not going on the pile of unread books in your house, right? Our work is in the giving. That's all we can do. And we can learn skills in giving as well. You know, take the book and hurl it at someone's head, or, you know, whatever, or you try to say things in such a way that they're more skillful rather than less skillful. And we'll keep talking about that tomorrow as well as we go into the topic of equanimity and change and being out of control, things like that. But in terms of the intention within our own hearts, so the motivation that's guiding us, it can be around much more of a sense of a freely given gift, right? This is my offering. So compassion. And these days, kind of some research circles and some Buddhist circles, there's actually this distinction that's sometimes being made between the term empathy and the term compassion, not in ordinary language, or they're used very much the same, but it actually started around a presentation, I think that was being offered to a group of people, including the Dalai Lama, about some research finding in the very common term that everybody uses pretty well, compassion fatigue came up. And I understand if you write in compassion on Google, compassion fatigue will come up as a suggestion, because it's so commonly searched for. So somebody used the term compassion fatigue, and His Holiness and the people around him, like Mathieu Ricard, who was there, who's a French man who became a Tibetan Buddhist monk, they started laughing, and it was, Mathieu suggested, he said, well, from a certain point of view in Buddhist psychology, you might call it empathy fatigue, but you wouldn't call it compassion fatigue. Compassion is the resolution. So, and this again, of course, it's not the way we commonly use language, but the reason for that is, well, there's also this neuroscientist named Tanja Singer in Germany who says she's actually found different regions of the brain for empathy and compassion. And so what psychology describes it as is we have this moment of empathy, really sensing into someone's difficulty, stress, unhappiness, and that is essential. And this, I would say, is a country, even a world that is sorely lacking in that. So it's essential that we more and more get that kind of sensitivity and recognition and resonance, real ability to resonate. And at the same time, in this model, empathy would be considered a necessary but not sufficient condition for compassion to arise. So what the research scientists say is, or psychologists say, is maybe we have that very genuine moment of empathy, which we need, but then they would say, then we over-identify with the person. It's not just a sense of what they're likely going through, but we dive right in and we're overwhelmed. And then we over-identify, and so that way they say empathy leads to empathic distress. And our own distress, our own state of overwhelm, our own unhappiness takes center stage, ironically. And all our energy is going to that. So the way I usually describe it is this kind of sequential thing where we have this moment of empathy, which we absolutely need, and we sense into the difficult state of this other person or a group of people, and then we are frightened by that, and we want to run away, or we're just exhausted. We feel we have nothing inside of us to respond. We're so overwhelmed. Or we're blaming. I gave you perfectly good advice 6 months ago. If you'd only listened, you wouldn't be in this terrible situation. Or we get into that strange egoic fixation we can get into, like, I'm going to be the one to save you. Here's your list of everything you need to do to be saved by me. Or we can have the compassionate response. And for a while, I was trying to school myself not to use the word compassion, to say the compassionate response. But that didn't work. But that's what it actually is. It is a response amongst many possible responses. Even if we have that moment of genuine feeling into. And certainly there are lots of times when we don't have that moment. So there's another whole kind of opening that needs to happen. But I think I got into that. I took such an interest in that because I found myself working, as many of you might be, with people who really are taking care of other people in some way, either professionally or personally, or people who just, by their nature, by their training, have an awful lot of empathy. That's not what's lacking, but they're burning out for some other reason. And so, as admiring as I've been of the emphasis on empathy training and all of that, I haven't really felt as moved to participate in that as I have looking at this other place. Like, that's interesting. What else has to be there for compassion to be full on? So the implication is that compassion has within it a kind of stability. It has perspective, even as it is responsive. Years and years ago, my friend Joseph Goldstein and I went to the Soviet Union to teach, and it was still the Soviet Union. And we were told as we were leaving that it was, well, we knew that kind of anyway, but it was illegal to teach meditation in the Soviet Union at the time. So we went as part of a tour group, and we even brought Joseph's mother as kind of cover. And we were told just before leaving that it was really important, not to disclose this. So every afternoon when everyone else would go off to a museum or something, Joseph and I would disappear, and we'd go off with a translator to someone's living room. And we would just teach, and I found myself, in different places every afternoon, so I found myself talking about compassion a lot, and I kept thinking, there's this really funny feeling in the room. And so finally I sat down with the translator and I said, when I say compassion, what do you say? And they said, oh, it's this state you are like broken, shattered, and they said it's like someone has taken a giant stake and driven it through your heart. I thought, no wonder there's a really funny feeling in the room. But we can be there, right? We can go to lots of different extremes. Being cold and indifferent, not caring, but also that extreme, right? Where it's too much and we're too over-identified. We've lost perspective. We are now as defined by the situation as the person undergoing it. And we don't have the energy to really, in a sustained way, be there. We also have no space, right? There's not a sense of like, well, how about this? Or even it doesn't have to be verbal, in the sense of giving advice, but just in one's being, right? Manifesting something other than the particular thing going on. And so what are we really offering? Like, where's the wisdom in there? So this is a challenging, long-term kind of exploration from the beginning of looking at those roots of interconnection and reformulating our vision of life, our worldview in that way, to understanding the sensitivities and the ways we need to open to one another and listen, and including to ourselves, and recognize pain as pain. And then, with ourselves, that starts with looking at our own fear and greed and jealousy and all those things we don't really like that much, and seeing if we can recast them, like reframe them, instead of calling them bad and wrong and terrible, terrible, terrible qualities. Consider them as qualities of suffering. They're causing us suffering now, they're onward leading into more suffering. What does that switch do? And then we do that with others as well. All the way to where's that basis of stability? Where's the perspective that can accompany our compassion, our compassionate efforts? And where does that kind of wisdom get engendered and nurtured? And how can we have it tied into compassion all along the way so that we don't burn out and it doesn't become just about us and our discomfort one more time. So here we are. That's compassion. And the reason that all those workshops were called Fierce Compassion was because if you think of compassion as having a stake driven through your heart, it's like, first of all, who wants to go there? And second of all, it doesn't sound very effective or powerful as a means to an action. And so there are a couple of things that are really, I think, great myths about compassion and prevalent in the West. And one is that it's something weak. That it will make you gullible, make you a sap, make you a doormat. so that I mean, years and years and years ago when I was working on my first book, Loving Kindness, that was a lot of years ago, more than 20, I read this interview in Time or Newsweek with a former beauty queen. She was Miss Kentucky of like the 50s or something. And Miss Kentucky was asked what she had to say about life. So this is like, 30 or more years after her reign. And she said, I'm so tired of smiling. And you think about like 30 or 40 years of like completely meaningless smile, totally vacuous, disconnected from any inner reality. And that's the fear that we have, like we're going to be boiling inside in some injustice and we're going to smile. That Ms. Kentucky smile because we're trying to be compassionate to all concerned. It's not like that, it's a power. But that is very hard to come to, except first of all experientially. And through recognizing that what gives something like compassion its power is its alliance with reality. This is how things are. We are connected. That responding out of hatred may have some short-term satisfaction, in its energy, but usually is not the best judgment or, set of options and so on. So how do we challenge that, and really take a look? Is it that weak? Is it that stupid? Do I become this Kentucky, really? And then another great myth, which is sort of prevalent and really forms a lot of what my work is countering, is this idea that it's qualities like love and loving kindness and compassion are sort of like gifts, that the idea that they are trainable, or Bob would say educable. It seems weird, and I understand it's weird, it sounds so cold or mechanistic, like I went for a 5-day retreat and I came out compassionate, or even my degree in loving kindness, my doctorate from them, it can sound kind of weird, but it's not cold or mechanistic in that way. It's really countering the notion that we tend to have, which is that something like compassion is a gift, and if you don't got it, you don't got it, it's recognizing the roots of something like compassion in awareness, how we're paying attention, in wisdom, and so on, and realizing all those things are completely trainable. And so it is very much in our hands how we cultivate or don't these nascent abilities, how we bring them forth into our lives or don't. It really is, in the end, like it is our responsibility as we go forward. So, what do you think of when you hear the word compassion? I'm very curious if we have a microphone. You can make Justin answer that if no one else answers it.
I have about 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
But maybe
Speak to the microphone.
I read about 1,000 questions about compassion, but I guess one of the things that sometimes I struggle with is.
Can you hear her? You
Oh.
have to.
Don't be afraid about
Okay.
having it
Can you hear
closer.
me now?
The thing I always hear is that you have to hold the microphone as though you're eating an ice cream cone.
Oh, okay. So I have like a lot of questions about compassion. I'm in like a helping profession, and so we talk a lot about burnout, and I think a lot about burnout. And I guess one of the things that I feel like I've learned a little bit is that burnout is less about being too compassionate and more about not having meaning in the work that you're doing. So I don't know, that was just a thought, but, so I guess some of my, questions are kind of, how would you give advice about common pitfalls that people run into when they get into fears about delivering compassion? One being kind of actively giving compassion, you have to do something versus kind of just sitting there and listening or just being there with the person. And another big one is kind of the fear that this will drag you down into kind of your own spiral of sadness.
First, a response to the thing about meaning, I think you're absolutely right. And sometimes what's both revolutionary and essential is recapturing the place where we find the sense of meaning. You know, so if the meaning we derive from a job, say, is in metrics, you know, this many people found homes, you know, or whatever. That's one thing, but if the sense of meaning we get derives from our own motivation, like I listen that much more carefully, or I resolve to really treat everyone with respect, no matter whether they're a client or a customer or whatever. That's a very different source, and it's a very different result, because even as we work toward those metrics, because that's the job, there's so many other factors involved that. So, for example, when it was after I wrote Real Happiness at Work, I was doing a workshop somewhere and somebody raised her hand, and she said that she worked in a call-in center fielding customer complaints, and she said, I love my job. I was like, really? And she said, because I decided to love everybody who calls. She said, I treat them all with respect, and I can't always help people. By the time they get to me, they've talked to 2 or 3 other people, they're completely freaked out. She said, but I treat everyone with respect, I really am honest. If I say I'll get back to you at 2 o'clock, I'll get back to you at 2 o'clock. And she just went on, she was like radiant, and I was like, wow. I think at the time of the workshop, I had just recently been a complaining customer myself, you know, and it was not that kind of exchange. And yet, you know, here it is, like a job that very possibly was not her dream job. You know, she was finding that sense of meaning in what she was bringing forth in it. So I think that's really true. And I think, you know, in terms of the questions you ask, it's like, it's made much easier when there is some kind of collective work, either at the workplace or amongst people with the same values, or, you know, if there's leadership at the workplace that is encouraging those kinds of questions, because it's a process. There's, I mean, there have been many times in my own life, and certainly some significant times, where I've been trying to figure out how to help somebody, for example, and there was one time where I was in that situation with a friend who was really very kind of endlessly depressed. Although he's much better now. It seemed like that day would never come. And I went to a Tibetan teacher of mine, Sonia Rinpoche, and I basically said, how can I help him? And his advice more or less was, stop trying, just be there. And it was very interesting, because it didn't mean, and this is very subtle, you know, it didn't mean give up, it didn't mean ignore him, it didn't mean stop visiting, it didn't mean any of the things we might take it to mean. It meant just be there.
Stop trying to fix it.
And stop trying to fix it, and see what emerges out of that moment. And it was very interesting, because I wouldn't just be there. I was in a hospital, and it was interesting seeing people come in out of like the greatest love, you know, and appreciating that. But sometimes there was a lot of, you know, a lot of like, you know, take 15 drops of this tincture and you'll be fine in a week, which was also very generous. But I could tell internal experience he was having was one of being pressured. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? Then I failed you. Then I have to, which doesn't mean never offer the drops, but there are different motivations we have in the offering, and sometimes if we're just there, what emerges out of that togetherness is a more helpful kind of offering than, and I've just seen that over and over and over again. So it's very hard for us because the words imply give up, don't be there, be there and think about your email instead of really be there or whatever. But it doesn't mean any of that. And so that's why I said the collective, it's like when people have that kind of experience together and can relate to one another, then there's a very healthy way of understanding, well, I went to that extreme, I went to the other extreme. The other part, which, I talked about earlier, is that it's very hard to find a balance and to recognize that balance is important. So I was part of a 4-year program for domestic violence shelter workers, this other institute, the Garrison Institute, and we were bringing tools of yoga and meditation to frontline workers, and then directors and supervisors of shelters were sort of wanting programs as well, so we started a parallel track. So it was somewhere in there that the women, the people who were directors and supervisors, themselves came up with this phrase, which I really liked, which was a culture of wellness. They wanted to help establish a culture of wellness at work. And for everybody, well, it was interesting, for everybody, that meant a physical space of some kind where people could just chill. But then there were things that were very different, for each person. And the nature of the culture, the domain of the culture, might be your body and mind. It might be your desk. It might be your office. It might be your entire workplace. So this one woman said, in that vein, that effort to establish a culture of wellness, she said, I've decided that from now on, I'm going to take a lunch break. And everyone in the room who did not work at a shelter was completely aghast. We said, you don't take a lunch break? Like, is it in your contract? And she said, oh yeah, it's on my contract. It's never enough time. There's always somebody who needs me. There's always something going on. Everything is urgent. But, she said, I realize I can't go on in a good way unless I actually shift that and I take a lunch break. So it was really interesting because we were meeting in between retreats, and so we got a chance to hear her narrative as it went on. So the first time she came in, she said it didn't work. She said, I closed the door, but somebody crouched down and looked through the keyhole. I was in there, so I didn't get a break. And maybe like 3 weeks later, she came in and she said, it worked. I closed the door and I shut off the lights. And I got a lunch break. So I realized, wow, and most likely the most difficult point in that whole story was realizing it was okay to want that, to need that. And then I don't know how much support she got for that, but she did it. So it's something like that.
Do you mind speaking to what if the culture you're in is a culture of workaholics, and the culture is also, if somebody, in terms of compassion, as opposed to processing it, it's like kind of blaming that person and saying, oh, what's wrong with that family? What's wrong with that patient? But they're putting this on us. How do you shift that?
Well, first of all, you probably need to find your support elsewhere. The immediate support. Find it somewhere else, not necessarily look for it in your immediate workplace, but you can find that support, with friends or people who share those values. And then there are ways of communicating that are, it's almost like you do the best you can. I don't think about shifting an entire system, I think about being authentic, which tends to have the effect of making for change in those around. And it's really, in a sense, all you can do is bring more of yourself and your authentic self to the situation. And it depends. I was having this conversation with somebody before. It depends on what feels appropriate to you in terms of how vulnerable you want to be or how much you want to reveal, or it's always different depending on your discernment. But there is a way of, if it feels right, of saying, this is the effect this had on me. I need to chill, or I'm finding this really hard. I'm getting really tired. I need to, I'm going to try it this way. Or I feel bad because I didn't listen to that family, I think, as much as I now think I should have. So it's not blaming, it's not saying, you people are such losers, so cold-hearted, or whatever, but it's very personal. And that's why you have to see, does that feel appropriate in that situation? And sometimes, to some extent, it does. Everything from, I don't feel, I've heard, stories or everything from, I don't feel right talking about people in quite that way, to, I don't think I really want to drink, or to, this is my New Year's resolution. I think I'm going to try to do this. Help me, would you?
It'll be hopefully quick.
No, that's okay.
So I love practical examples. I'm kind of a very black and white person, and you guys have given the example of the subway a couple of times, and being somebody who takes the good old F train. Can you give an example of, you were saying relate to everybody as you were, if you were stuck with them for the rest of your life in that subway car. Can you give an example of, like, when the mariachi band gets on the subway car with you and all you want to do is have peace and quiet, or there is, the crazy person 3 doors down, or 3 seats down, rattling away. Can you maybe give just an example of how both of you, or how you would react in that situation?
You feel like that?
I didn't quite get it, the subway.
Let's say you were on the subway car and this band gets on the car and you really want peace and quiet. Or there's a crazy person 3 seats away.
Yeah.
So how do you
Well,
relate?
that kind of thing that
How do
happens,
you
that
relate?
does happen.
Yeah.
Well, usually the band wants to make noise until you give them some money. Just give them some money. It's a pleasure to give money to people. And so that's the best way to do it, I think. And it's interesting to see how people, when you see them coming down toward you, which people do something, which people look at the thing, which people look away, how they react. And so that's not really too awful, I think. And crazy one, well, how does you know that they're crazy? At least they're not asking you for anything. They're just sitting there being crazy, I guess. But I don't know. That some people look ill, or they're passed out, or they reek of alcohol, or they're different kind of conditions. And one is not equipped necessarily to take care of them. So you have to pass them by sometimes. If someone really is fit or something, then I think people naturally, and one wants to try to do something about it, do it for them. The subway example is just there really because it's the main point about it is that we have one as little to do with people on the subway as possible normally. Everyone you want to read something, if you don't have something to read, that's the great thing about iPhones. You can always find something on your iPhone. Otherwise, you're doomed to read those things up there, and you can go to this and that school, and you can get a job, and you can go do some sort of thing, in New York. And the idea that suddenly you'd have to confront it, look at all the people in your car because you were stuck together. I usually don't use Martians, though. I make it a national security experiment, and Henry Kissinger's voice comes on.
Oh, well, now I'm old, I haven't heard you use it.
You will be, you know, isolated for a long period of time. It's national security experiment. You observe how you react. It's kind of a matter of emotions. But it's a matter of shifting, and it's analogous to if you realize that life is infinite, your life is infinite. And that because usually we relate to lots of people in the sense that we're not going to really see them again. It's, you know, it doesn't matter too much what really happened, etc. But if you have a sense of endless involvement with people, then you want to maximize and optimize your relationships to them. It becomes a normal thing rather than like an unnecessarily strenuous thing. You know? So that's the reason for the analogy. And it came up to me, actually. I had the analogy, being a New Yorker, partly because I was asked to talk about why one would take the Bodhisattva attitude, you know, of living for others, as choosing that as some source of energy, actually, and a source of not a source of fatigue and a source of like exhaustion and burnout, but a source of inspiration. And actually analyzing what does make you happy and satisfied and energized, and noticing that one of the key points when you really are happy in life is when you're not thinking about whether you're happy or not. And when you're blown away by something, and then you can do that right away by not thinking about whether you're happy and being focused, being distracted by focusing on whether others are happy. And actually, you have a more vibrant and energized life in that case. It's not necessarily a job; it's just it's like an orientation, and being automatically aware, therefore, of others' perspective and things. I mean, it's not even Buddhism; it's like. Or Old English, put yourself in the other fellow's shoes, right? They have expressions like that. See things from other people's point of view. Actually, Shantideva is a famous teaching on that, which the Dalai Lama is the great inspired by, inspires people about. And there was a book in the 60s, and it still existed in the 70s, by someone called Ken Keyes. Super bestseller. And he published it himself. In those days, you really needed a publisher, but he published it himself from something called the Foundation of Living Love in Tennessee. And it was called the Handbook of Higher Consciousness. And he mentioned Shantideva once in the introduction, but he never referred to Buddhism, he never referred to any kind of religious thing. And he called the teaching about seeing things from other people's perspectives, he called that the automatic consciousness doubler. And it was a big thing that people did in the 60s, In other words, stop in your interaction and then sort of see what the other person is seeing, as a kind of a constant exercise. And that's where he taught that Bodhisattva spirit, in Tennessee. It was a super bestseller. People really liked it around the country. The Handbook of Higher. It's kind of a classic. You can find a printing of it. Probably going to be valuable in another few decades. Ken Keyes is his name. And so that's it doesn't matter what do you do and how do you do it. What do you enjoy doing, actually, is the key. There's a guy who's really obviously a crack addict, and he's always hanging out in front of a store, in front of Columbia, where the gate of Columbia is on Broadway, between 116 and 15, and he's always over there. He's kind of like this. His eyes are like difficult, and he's clearly using something when he comes there. And people get very offended, they're very annoyed about it. They scurry over the side and they go there and they avoid him. And when he sees me coming, he really lights up. Because I have a practice where it isn't that I put dollars in there to be prepared. If I did that, I'd be good. But I have a thing like, okay, I go in my pocket, and the first thing I come up with, I will give. I don't put back and make, or can you make change? I don't do that. I just automatically do it. And a couple of times that's happened with like a 10 or even a 5. And someone else is walking with me because we're going down to, have dinner or something at some restaurant a little further down. And people get really mad, some of my Protestant colleagues particularly. And they say like, you gave him $10, You couldn't give $10 to all these people begging. Like, why are you they get really upset? And my answer always is like, well, they all didn't ask me for anything. A, and B, I didn't intend to give them $10. Usually I have ones in there. And I thought, I was hoping for the one that was a 10. And he saw the 10, and I go, wow, I can have like an ounce of crack here on this one. Plus a burger, maybe. Maybe you get a burger in one once he gets his snort. Or whatever. And it's a pleasure, actually. I feel happy about it. You know, I'm walking past a store, which is like a grocery store type of thing, but it's sort of fancy for the college community, the students. Everything is almost double overpriced. So they're robbing you just inside the window. And this guy is just like, you know, maybe somebody give him something. And I enjoy seeing him nowadays. Sometimes they say, sometimes I'm carrying things in both hands. They look, man, I'm busy, and I go, he doesn't mind. He's cool. He knows I'm good for his part. And he lets me go. And so I don't dread walking down the street there, that's what I'm saying. So what makes you happy is the thing. And then there's an analysis. The Shantideva thing is like an analysis, where I give people what I call the Shantideva challenge. And then people think like, well, what? They say, well, where do you really get, you know, the Shantideva has this statement. It says, any pleasure that comes to you in life comes from wishing other people's pleasure and happiness. And any misery that comes to you in life comes from wishing your own pleasure, your own happiness. And people get very challenged by that verse. You know, my classes students think, what? No way. And I make it a challenge every year. I say, okay, tell me something you had where you were really looking for your own pleasure. And then people come up with different things, and then you reanalyze what it is, and then they begin to realize, gee whiz, you know, when I'm thinking about what's going to give me pleasure, I'm automatically without it. Or even if I'm having a little fun, and I then think about how much fun am I having, that's the killer. Well, not enough. I mean, it could have been like, could be better. Definitely, it immediately happens. But then finally, people come, especially the guys, they wade in on there, and then they end up with something about sex, you know. And the brave ones, we have a good class, and they come up with something about sex. Oh, that I great thing because I want the pleasure. And then I refer them to a sex therapist. And that always usually creates quite a sensation in the class. And I don't have a particular sex therapist. But I say, well, if that's what, you know, maybe you're missing something. You know. But that's a really, it's not an idealistic or do-good thing. It's actually practice. You really look at it. You go to a museum, you see a Van Gogh. You know, and maybe at first all those crows and the sunset, whatever, right? And then immediately you're like, oh, that weird guy cut his ear off, he inhaled too much turpentine, he was like, really weird. And then, oh, it's a Van Gogh, I wonder how much it went to the last auction, you know, like how much the Chinese guy paid for it, whatever. And it's all boring, you know, you hardly see the thing, you know. So being distracted, like, you give a gift to a child. You know, at Christmas, your own gifts are really boring, you know. It's like her blue car, you know. You get a sweater and then you immediately, at least in my case, I think about the moths. Okay, this is a gift to me and the moths. We're both going to enjoy the sweater in different ways, you know. Immediately think about it. But when somebody else gets something and they light up for a second, then that gives you pleasure. Especially a child, you know. So just analyze what you get, what fun really is, what pleasure really is. And you will find out that the compassion thing is totally practical, actually. And I actually, do I have a little time now?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, and then I'll just turn it over to you.
Sure.
Totally.
When do we stop? We're almost stopping, are we? 6:15? Or do we go to 6:45?
We can go to 6:30.
Oh, we have a little.
Dinner's, yeah, because we don't have to
Oh, yeah.
walk down the hill.
All right.
So we can go to 6:30, and then I'll have people come up and
I did
sign.
want to say one thing.
Yeah, so it's just this one thing, because in this light, something that can actually be fun is, that's why I keep using the word experiment. It's like experiment with your own mind state. Like, take a look at what it feels like when that crazy person, crazy seeming person, just feels so alien, so other. And depending on what inspires you or what you're moved to do as a kind of method, see what shifts that. Sometimes I will just offer loving kindness or remind yourself this is, and people say they remind themselves this is someone's child. It certainly could be someone's parent. And just if you play with that and keep paying attention, you notice that there can be a very different sensibility about the person, which isn't like appreciating their screaming or whatever they're doing. It's different than that. But that really cold, hard sense of like, you're like way over there, and I'm like sealed off over here. That's what dissolves, And so I myself, because I'm just so used to it, would use silent phrases of loving kindness. But people do all kinds of reflections. But it needs to be like in that spirit. I love that sense of something you enjoy. Because it's not forcing yourself to change or something like that. It's like saying, wow, look at how much flexibility there really is here. And what's it like when that's actually my very favorite thing to say about loving kindness practices. What's it like? What's it like when I wish you well? Instead of what I usually do. What's it like? Yes, Dr. Bob.
So what I want to talk about is this light, which also comes up in the Shantideva challenge. Because of course, one thing that Shantideva does that most people don't think, and that is that the human body itself, actually, in Buddhist biology, in Buddha's scientific biology, the human body and the shape and the form of the human being grows from compassion, actually. We are the type of animal that we are because we are, like a mammal, for example, having the young inside the body of the more compassionate member of the gender among the two genders of a mammal. That's already a huge step past laying an egg somewhere and burying it in the sand, and hoping for the best, carrying it in your own body. And so the Buddhist biology, the human being is not the product of aggression, mighty hunter, and all that. That's considered not correct by Buddha as a biological scientist. And I just wanted to leave you with this, and so I'm leaving at the end of this session, and that, and I don't have enough time to really do it properly, but karma, we hear about karma, and we think, everyone thinks it's like fate, or it's some sort of mystical or religious thing, and it's not. Karma means causation, that's all it means. And I actually translate it as evolution, because karma, karma is Buddha's discovery in a way of causation. In the Eightfold Path of the Four Noble Truths, which is the actual therapy or practice or whatever that the Buddha taught, the first limb of the Eightfold Path, first branch of it, is called realistic worldview. And or you could even say belief. And so people say, it's going to be religion, you have to believe something. But actually, what is you're supposed to believe or have as a view? You're supposed to have a view of causality. It's a revolutionary thing to really accept the process of causality, that you are part of a process of causality. Why? Because the delusion that causes our suffering in his analysis as a psychologist, as a scientific observer, is that we think that there's something about us that is disconnected from all causality. That's an unfixed, an unchanging identity that's in there that we have to kind of defend and promote, and we answer to, and it's a source of drives that we can't resist, and impulses and so on. This is all our problem, according to him. So to accept causation as a reality means, even as a view, is an immediate erosion of that sort of space that's absolutely apart from everything. That's the real me somewhere in there, if you follow me. And karma therefore means evolutionary causality, right? So what that means is, in a very practical sense, then Buddhist ethics grows from that. And because it isn't just the genes, and it isn't just the parents, and it isn't just the environment and so forth. It is your mind. What you do with your body, with your speech, which is a very important kind of action that you have, and with your mind, when you think even, shapes your life in this life. And we know that's true. If we think a lot of positive thoughts, we feel happier, we are like more contented, and therefore we have more smiles. If we smile more, that changes the wrinkles on our face and the expression that we have and so on. If we're frowning all the time, that shows up later on when you get older. And so everything changes us in this life, even though it can't change so dramatically once you have a certain type of body. But then your next body is shaped by these actions. Everything is a causation. We are processes. So ethics, and then the ultimate goal is more and more connection. Because the more you connect with other beings, the happier you are, the more stronger you are, the more the better it is, actually. The more you connect. The more isolated you are, the more demented you become, the more deprived you feel, the weaker you feel. Solitary punishment, which they use all the time in the demented prison system we have, is very, very damaging to people. So this is just a well-known thing. So then the Buddha himself, because of the evolutionary state that he personally achieved experientially, is therefore the ideal is to be connected to everyone. To be that's the most blissful thing, apparently. I guess you have to be blissful because there's so many problems they all have. To connect to all of them, it has to be an overriding bliss that enables you to do that. You know, which is then when you really feel compassion. It's when you feel happier, and then you immediately observe how others are not happy, and then you would feel sorry for them that they are not happy, and your bliss wants to flow toward them, right? So that's the extreme. So then ethics fits right on that. For example, the three physical, ethical, what they call paths of action are to kill, to steal, and to engage in sexual misconduct. Those are the three bodily things that you shouldn't do. Positive things are to save life, to give gifts, and to have benevolent sexuality, beneficial sexuality that doesn't harm anybody. And either the partner or yourself or the family or anything, it's not harmful. And but think of why are those three then chosen? When you take a life, you're saying that life had nothing to do with me. That person has nothing. That's the extreme way of alienating yourself from another being, is to take their life. Actually, you can't destroy them because then they're reborn. And then the next life that they find you, they don't like you automatically. But they don't really know why. But because you killed them in a previous life. But in any way, the main point for you yourself, this town's not big enough for the both of us, sort of type of thing. Me and Saddam Hussein can't exist on the same planet, So you kill somebody, and then you diminish your connection to somebody, that you took their life, right? You save a life, then they become kind of connected to you. You've adopted them in a certain way, right? So you expand by saving lives. You contract by taking lives. Taking people's property, then you don't care about their sense of ownership or their need for the object or whatever it is, and then you have something. But then you have cut yourself off from that person. And then sexuality is really critical, because in sexuality is where biologically human beings do connect one to another. I'm sorry, I don't need to really look at you all the time. Poor Laura. Poor Laura gets in the way. And then so sexuality is where normally beings do melt into one another, kind of. They do go beyond the self. They identify with the beloved, at least ideally. And there's sort of an underlying pattern of that, whether or not it's really achieved all the time. And so to use that harmfully as a way of being more separate from another person, to just use that person as an object in some way, or dominate or something like that, is particularly that one point where, and of course the human being precisely, because the melting is very deep, and the human being sexual, check out, like elephant foreplay, it's really not happening. Or crocodile doesn't happen. So human beings can have much more experience, actually, in that sort of melting one another. And that's because of the sociality, the compassionateness of the human being. So those three are selected by Buddha as a descriptive system of relative life in a practical way, so that by doing something good, by not taking a life and saving a life, then you've expanded your sense of aliveness, you see. So there's something in it for you. also altruistic and then you didn't take that person's life or that animal's life or whatever it is. Something in it, but there's also something in it for you because you have now expanded your sense of connection. You're a bigger being because you can identify with being that you didn't kill. Whereas when you kill them, then you get more and more isolated, and then you project into others that they want to take your life, and you become more and more armored, and it's not good. Speech is similar. Lying, causing division between others, backbiting to make people dislike each other and cause conflict between them. Speaking meaninglessly, just rambling on when you don't know what you're talking about and wasting other people's mind space by blabbering into them in a useless way. It isn't really gossip, it's just speaking meaninglessly or harshly, using speech as a weapon to harm people. Meanwhile, speech is a sacred thing because, again, speech comes in an animal form where you can share minds with another being. Through speech, very imperfectly, words don't really necessarily convey everything that you meant, and they sometimes have great misunderstanding. But still, it's a way, when I listen to you, I open my mind to you. When you listen to me, you open your mind to me. So therefore, we can share mind. Even people who are dead, maybe we read their book or something, or we hear their idea, we get a sense of their mind. And imperfect as it may be, it's a marvelous, precious thing, speech is. And so to use it abusively, and the opposite is you tell the truth. When you lie to someone, you imprison them in a false reality. You separate them more from reality. You don't care whether they're connected to reality, etc. You deny what you think is reality for them, and you separate yourself from them. So those all fit in this, either identify more or connect more. In other words, in basic ethics fits with this basic compassion idea. And finally, with the mind, which is, and I always have papers from students, on the 10 Commandments and these tenfold paths. It's called the tenfold path of body, speech, and mind. There's always 7 or 8 that are more or less similar, and then there's some that are a little different, but they actually have they kind of fit. So it's a very ancient kind of thing. This is, and Dalai Lama has it in terms of a secular ethic. It doesn't need to have religious backing. It isn't ordered by God or Buddha or something. It's just practical. So in the mind, if you have a very greedy mind, and everything you see, you want it, and you're jealous of other people having it, and that's again separating you, and the opposite being, detached and generous and enjoying that they have something nice, etc. And so those are the two things, of connecting and disconnecting. And then malicious mind, I think in the commandments it's covetous mind, right? And they don't usually give you an opposite, but there is the opposite, is a generous mind. And then malicious mind, thinking of doing harm to another, and thinking of them as an object to be harmed, etc., rather than loving mind, or at least patient and tolerant mind of how irritating they are and how annoying they are. That's a step to being loving. And finally, having a realistic view of the world and connecting to its reality and being confident that the more you know of the reality, the better off you will be, the more connected to it you will be. Whereas having unrealistic and completely delusionary view, the more deluded you are, the more separated you are from where you are. So all the basic ethics, body, speech, and mind, 3-4-3, completely encodes, ways of being more compassionate, basically. And even the fact that we have this human form comes from having been compassionate in other animal forms, and wanting, therefore, to be able to more embrace another, identify, we can hug people, etc. If you have only claws, you couldn't caress somebody, like Mr. Lion and Mrs. Lion, they don't really have too cuddly caressing people. The paw, if they make sure the claw doesn't come out, but if they get excited, they might claw each other. It's not cool. And a human being has a soft thing. You break your fingernail if you're trying to scratch somebody. So we don't have big fangs, we're like wimps. Because we are animals born of connection. We became human, this amazing creatures that we are, by wishing the happiness of another. So even our body came from that in Shantideva. So his challenge, that's a good way. When some guy complains, well, I went to them and I wanted something and I was really happy to have it. But you're not, you get your blue card and you immediately were, actually I have a habit in my life, Sharon, to make you, usually when I get a new thing like that, I usually bang it into something right away.
Oh.
I do. And then I feel kind of relieved it's sort of like
It's over. It's done.
don't have to worry about the perfect thing, just scratch it right off. And I know it drops its value in case of resale, you want to trade it in, it's in our discard culture, like industrial culture, but it sort of relieves you of having to keep it perfect.
I know.
It's too nerve-wracking, it's terrible. So I just wanted to leave you with that thing. It's a very practical thing. It's called the tenfold path of positive and negative evolutionary action. And each one has the opposite. And it's a really nice thing to sort of get an idea of. And those guys at Yale who are down on empathy and all this kind of thing, they're not only down on it, but also there's people who do studies and they say there's no real altruism. Or altruism really, it's terrible. People who are altruistic just do it for selfish reasons. Like that's wrong, that makes it wrong. But no, it's a win-win. If altruism benefits you, and Sharon mentioned earlier, Lama's thing that he loves to say, if you want to be effectively selfish, meaning get something for yourself, then be altruistic. Be a wise selfish, which means by wisdom, by intelligence, you understand that you get satisfied by helping another be satisfied. That's the greatest source of strength and energy and satisfaction, far from burnout. It's really meaningful to be kind to others, and it really benefits you. As he says, when you take a bodhisattva vow, as crazy and unrealistic as it seems, I'm going to help all beings. I'm going to take it all of them. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to fix you with that and put you on a list and give you a pill. Doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means I'm going to want to take care of all of them. Then the Dalai says the first person that you succeed in making happy by wanting to make all other beings happy is yourself. You feel happy someday. Oh, I have a purpose in life. I want to spread happiness. I want other beings to be happy. And then you quickly learn. You don't go up and grin at people. They think you're crazy. Then they will put you as the crazy person, like grinning on the subway. I'm like, we don't really want to admit to ourselves in this culture how scared of happiness we all are. Your husband comes home, or maid or roommate, something, I don't know your status, marital status, but your husband comes home, your wife, your friend, and says, I'm so happy. I don't know why, I'm really happy. Are you pleased at that? I don't know. What have you been drinking? What have you been doing? Are you okay? Are you going to have a manic crash in a minute? Take it easy, not necessarily. Whoa, what? And then finally, if they convince you that they're not demented, temporarily demented, and they're not anything, and they didn't do anything wrong, which it probably takes a bit of convincing, then the next thing you feel is like, oh, what about me? How come I'm not happy like that? And you feel jealous. So, happiness, being really happy or something cheerful, is illegal, more or less, in our culture. Even though we say, when people say, how are you? You say, oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm great. Say it. And then sometimes, if you want to be more brutally honest, like this one lady here, you say, like, as long as I don't think too much about it, I'm fine. That's what they say. Actually, Tibetans have a great thing they say. You ask, how are you? They say, Mashin Zamla. Mashin Zamla. 4 syllables, which means just barely not dead. That's considered a very sophisticated way of greeting someone. Mashin Zamla. Mashin Zamla. Oh, Mashin Zamla. Just barely not dead.
So you have to say that to 100,000 people soon.
Maybe. They do. So anyway, that's what I want to leave you with, okay? Practical ethics and how it's positive to be ethical. Look at someone who ripped off all their contractors, gone bankrupt 20 times, and stuck their ground. Is that guy satisfied? Is that guy happy? He's in a gold-plated, weird tower there, like on top of a tarot card. Usually in that tarot card, you fall off that tower. And he's sitting up there, and he's running around making life hectic for himself. Poor wife is sitting there, and she had to copy what's her name?
Michelle's
Speech. She couldn't think of what to say. About something positive. What was it? She copied
Michelle's
speech. And they're totally discontented. Although my wife thinks he'll be saying, First time in his life, he will be subject to governmental housing, will be when he moves into and he'll think it's a dump. And then he won't want to put gold plating because he can't own it. So it's, they're going to all come back to New York all the time. So Mayor de Blasio are going to get used to it. Raise taxes. The way out. You're going to want to be there with the gold-plated fixture.
Well, it's already
And the massive dissatisfaction. Massive dissatisfaction. Restless dissatisfaction. That's it. So I'm sure it's time for food.
we're
I
gonna
apologize for leaving a day early. I didn't mean to. It was untoward event. These things happen when you're a Buddhaholic.
What are you gonna do? What are you doing in India?
What?
What are
What
you
are you
doing?
doing?
The Dalai Lama is giving a 14-day teaching and anointment, as it's really called, Abhisheka. People call it empowerment, is the wrong translation actually. It's an initiation, you could say, to a certain practice. But in this particular one, he always says, you people are not really capable of receiving this initiation, and I'm not really capable of giving it. He said, because I haven't really attained what you should have attained to give it, and you probably don't know the practice and the method, and you don't have the mental stability, and it's a very advanced, very, very high practice. But there's a tradition where, as a good omen, you give it en masse, to people to plant a seed in their karmic unconsciousness that some of the future lives, and they really become a yogi or yogini of the time machine. I call it the time machine practice. And actually, I love it myself. I've been at least 20 times. He's done it for 34 times in his life. This will be the 34th, I think. And usually a Dalai Lama or a Panchen Lama in Tibet used to give that initiation only once or twice in a lifetime. And he had a special thing once they were in exile. The female Buddha of the Kalachakra, Mrs. Kalachakra, whose name is Vishwamata, the Universal Mother, she appeared to him in a dream and said, you should give this a lot to the world, type thing. Whether or not it's all right, don't worry, not everybody can practice. As long as they have a positive attitude about it, you can do that. But what I particularly like about it, it's a form of the Buddha that is a male-female union form, what they call a father-mother Buddha. And it has its body, both of their bodies are made out of time, units of time. Kala means time, chakra means a wheel, and a wheel is like in English can mean a machine. So it's like time machine Buddha, because the whole body, the organism of the Buddha's form is time. And what I believe it signifies is that Buddha, before he became a perfect Buddha, he had a vow that he wouldn't attain nirvana and liberation from suffering until all beings had attained liberation from suffering. So then how do you attain Buddha? Well, the only way you can do it is if you reach a place, the enlightenment itself is a place where you're present in all of the future. So that the future is immediate to you, as well as the past. So time is not the illusion that time is only this minute, going along like this, and the future is inaccessible, and the past is lost, is undone in that insight. And so you are there for everybody. Your compassion, although you're free, you're in what is a specific moment for people caught in the delusion of time and space. You're there in the reality of time and space, which is that the future is here, actually, really, or is here to you. And so your compassion makes sure that all beings in your field, which is an infinite field theoretically, are having optimal progress toward their own experience of that themselves, their own Buddhahood, not anything less than. It's not like they're going to be a satellite to your Buddhahood, their own Buddhahood, every other being. And so then he shows, he gave a teaching where he showed his body as somehow symbolizing that infinite presence in time. And that because some beings are just not ready, they can't sort of be, it's like you can't take a seed and stretch it and have a rose bush. You know what I mean? You destroy the seed. There's sort of an evolutionary time that is required for beings caught in a certain, they have to unravel their delusions and their alienation from themselves, from their own reality, in their own gradual way. And the idea is that there's an awareness, didn't create the situation, is not omnipotent, can't just bring everybody instantly into enlightenment in their notion of an instant, but can instantly be at their optimal moment of enlightenment after all the choices they make, and can be present compassionately with them to encourage them and nudge them toward the right choices and the best choices, the better choices. So it's a symbol of the ongoing love and compassion and connectedness of the enlightened Buddha of our era of 2,700 years ago, or whatever, Shakyamuni Buddha, his name, or Gautama Buddha. So he's still with us, in other words. And we can detect his presence through his teaching, through his community of people who live by his teaching, through people like the Dalai Lama, through people like Sharon. And Sharon, as usual, I have to thank you for coming to Myanmar.
Oh, thank
Teaching
you.
our people, teaching me lots of things.
Oh, thank
About
you.
how to take care of the crazy people on the subway.
That's right.
Thank you all
Don't
for
leave though,
coming.
because people want you to sign books, so
Oh, okay.
don't run away. It'll just take a few minutes.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Tell all your friends about Myanmar.
So really seriously, Bob is going, it's an arduous journey, and then there are gonna be lots and lots and lots of people at the other end, so
So
let's,
500,000.
yeah, so let's do lots of loving kindness, and, we're gonna come back together here at 8 tonight, and, if you have a book of Bob's and you want to sign it,
Yeah, I was happy to do that.
then you can get going.